Pope Francis's health condition remains guarded, but according to the Vatican updates, he continues to improve. He was admitted to the hospital on February 14th, and there are new developments in the Marco Rupnik scandal and Cardinal Robert McElroy, who was officially installed as the new Archbishop of Washington, D.C. Here with an analysis of all of that and much more is the Papal Posse, editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, Robert Royal, and canon lawyer, priest of the Archdiocese of New York, Father Gerald Murray. Thank you both for being here. Gents, Pope Francis had another restful night. Imagine that, according to the Vatican. That seems to be the repeated update every morning. The Pope rested. He had a restful night. He slept well. Okay, 27 days at Rome's Gemelli Clinic. He's continuing to receive high-flow oxygen therapy during the day and non-invasive mechanical ventilation at night. The health briefings are becoming less frequent. He's not been seen in public, however, since being admitted. But as we showed our audience last week, he had a public utterance, this audio message where he sounded very weak. And of course, March 13th marks the 12th anniversary of his election. Father Murray, I'll start with you. Your thoughts on the 12th anniversary of this pontificate and the Pope's condition?
Yes, Raymond, we were all there in Rome 13 years ago, and it was a big surprise when the Pope from Argentina was elected, because we knew that he had been the runner-up at the previous election in which Benedict XVI was elected, but it really wasn't expected. And I guess I could say, honestly, the way the pontificate's gone really wasn't expected either, because this is probably the most controversial pontificate, certainly in my lifetime, 20th century and 21st century. It's he's unlike any other pope that I've ever studied or known. And as a result, there is a lot of crisis and confusion in the church. The whole synod on synodality matter is hanging over us, a new style of being church. Where that's going to go from here on out is unknown, but certainly we're praying for him in his suffering. I've had pneumonia. I know what it's like not to be able to breathe, and at his age, and having now had the pneumonia for about 4 weeks, this is serious. So hopefully he can improve, but it's he's suffering a lot. So we pray that God relieves that.
Yeah, Bob, I want your impressions of these ongoing Vatican updates. Every day we get these updates, and basically it's, the Pope rested well, which, that's not really an update. I mean, the medical updates are far more substantial, and we're getting those, every so often, usually in the afternoons, but now they're spaced out. Your reaction to that and where we really are. I mean, I had someone tell me in Rome this week, look, he still has pneumonia.
Well, look, we've all complained for years and years about the way that the Vatican press office handles events. And I mean, the possible death of a pope might be the most sensitive thing of all. And so you understand in a way that they don't want to be sensationalistic. They want to put the best face on things. They want to give us the idea that the Pope is in good spirits. He sleeps well. He's cooperative, with the therapies that they're providing. But one has to assume, as Father said, if you've had pneumonia or if you've had a serious breathing difficulty, that there's a lot more to the story. And God bless him. There have been a lot of prayers that have been said for him. St. Peter's Square has been full of people saying rosaries for him night after night. But I think we can assume that there's a lot more that's behind that. And it's going to be interesting to see now what the segue is, because the doctor said he would be at least in the hospital for a few more days.
Yeah.
Well, we're into a weekend almost, and I think it's probably going to go through the weekend. And there are rumors in Rome that there has now been a kind of a medical suite set up at Santa Maria Maggiore.
Well, why? And just to tell people, that's not the Vatican. No. Santa Maria Maggiore is a basilica in Rome where the Pope goes to pray. His tomb is going to be there. But why would you set up a medical suite there?
Yeah, well, I think we're going to have a medical explanation for that. Obviously, if they really wanted to, they could have done that in Casa Santa Marta, which is where he normally lives. It may just be that he needs more isolation, because there are an awful lot of people who are going in and out of Santa Marta. And as you rightly say, he has a real affection for Our Lady of the Roman people. Our Lady Salus Populi Romani, which is this famous image. It was one of the first images he visited when he was elected Pope 13 years ago today, or 12 years ago today. And he visits it before and after many of his trips as well. So he's got an affection for that. And maybe if that's true that they're setting up that medical suite, maybe it's a sign that that's where he wants to be at the very end.
Yeah, Father, as part of these daily reports, we hear the Pope is praying, he receives the occasional visitor, conducts papal business throughout this moment of convalescence. And we've heard reports of visits from the Cardinal Secretary of State, Parolin, as well as rumors of visits by Jesuit canonist Cardinal Girlanda. We referenced him during our last time on the show here. I sat down with Father Robert Sirico on my Arroyo Grande podcast this week, and he shared talk of a possible rule change to the general congregation. Now, those are the meetings of cardinals that happen before a conclave. Watch.
I don't know if any of this is true. We have to see. But the gossip is, well, there's several of these rumors, is that the chief canonist, Cardinal Girlanda, also Jesuit, has been in and out of the hospital room, and that they have been working on a document that will revise that governing document that governs the transition and the conclave and the election. And that in this document, it indicates, and this is where the rumor is, I don't know if this is true or not, but it's not uninformed. You know, it's not out of the realm of possibility. That would say that there won't be these congregations, or if there are these congregations, they will follow the method of meeting that the Synod had, which is rather than just a series of conversations and lectures by the cardinals over X number of days, that they sit around a table with 10 people and all express themselves, say a little prayer, and then have it all redacted. And then the redactor would kind of say, this is the consensus at the table.
So the rumor is it's controlled speech like the Synod rather than an open conversation among equal cardinals. So this would be Pope Francis trying to control the outcome of that general congregation.
And that maybe lay people, like at the Synod, lay people and non-cardinals could be added to that conversation. It's a conversation. It's not the vote. So that's one of the rumors that's going around, and has really been pushed by some notable influential Jesuits.
Father, your thoughts on this, and would a rule change to include laity in these general congregations during the interregnum conclave process be canonically kosher?
Well, the Pope is the chief legislator, so he can change the law. Would it be wise and prudent? Absolutely not. I mean, this is, I mentioned that synodality matter hanging over the church. If in the name of synodality, we claim that everybody from lay people to deacons and priests and women and men religious, along with bishops and cardinals, have to be in these meetings that are held up till now by the College of Cardinals alone, that's changing the whole thing. And that creates a whole dynamic because, of course, if a meeting is held between all the cardinals, including the ones over age 80, well, these are all cardinals. That's part of their job. They're responsible. They know each other. They're also all shepherds in the church. If now lay people, and who's going to pick them, by the way, that's always the question. If they're there, I can see a pressure dynamic building where you'll have, let's be blunt, radical Catholics who are unhappy that women can't be ordained, getting up and saying the next pope has to be a prophet. He's got to have to ordain women. And then the cardinals are all sitting there and saying, well, wait a minute. We're here to talk among ourselves about who's the best candidate. This forum, as I'm speculating, could be used for pressure groups. So I would be very worried. The idea that everything that's inherited by from the church's past has to be re-examined and questioned and even cast aside, that's a revolutionary dynamic that unfortunately in this pontificate has gotten legs. We got to stop this. The College of Cardinals are pastors. They're not bureaucrats waiting for experts to tell them what they need to do.
Yeah. Bob, I imagine the Papal Posse will not be invited to address the general congregations. But should we be preparing ourselves for a conclave on synodality?
Well, one of the ironies about this rumor, if it proves to be,
it is a rumor.
We should
stipulate that once more.
Is that Jorge Mario Bergoglio was not very well known to the other cardinals when he was elected 12 years ago today. Yeah. And it was his performance, and it was a performance. He gave a discourse at the general congregations that convinced a lot of people that he was going to be the reformer for the church. I've talked with a couple of cardinals who voted for him and kind of indicated without telling me how they voted in the actual conclave, with a little bit of buyer's remorse, that they just said, you know, one of them, an American cardinal, said to me, I just felt that God wanted him to be Pope. So it's ironic that he wants to change the form on which he himself was able to present himself to the other cardinals. And I think that these small group discussions, look, there's a role for every type of discussion in the world, but what we really need, I think, going forward in the next papacy, I'm going to kind of be a prophet now, is we need someone who is conspicuously spiritual. I think we have too much conversation about worldly matters, too little about what the church's lane is, if I can put it that way.
Yeah.
And the other two things, quite bluntly, are we need reform of finances. You know, there's still a lot of murkiness around the Vatican finances and a crisis of support.
Well, this is the same thing we were talking about 12 years ago, Bob. And Bergoglio was elected to fix the finances, fix the Curia, right?
Right. And the other thing, obviously, is the sexual abuse crisis.
Yes.
I know we're going to talk about some of that going forward, but those two things, and plus being conspicuously spiritual, I don't know that you can gauge who ought to be Pope on the basis of these roundtable discussions. I think you need someone who projects something and that you can see that he's going to project something in public.
Yeah, and you tipped us off on this, talking about the sex abuse thing. A big story this week is the ongoing scandal of disgraced Jesuit Marco Rupnik. Rupnik continues to operate as a priest, despite accusations of abusing at least 40 women religious over a span of 20 years. Again, a friend of Pope Francis's who was excommunicated, then unexcommunicated. Now he's a priest in good standing again. Another possible victim, a religious sister, has come forward with her story after two others did the same last year. This week, an Italian reporter confronted Rupnik about the accusations at the baggage claim at Rome's airport. Here's some of what happened.
No. Mi scusi se la disturbo. Senta, volevamo capire come mai lei non si è difeso pubblicamente mai da queste gravi accuse che queste suore le hanno...
Father, we've been covering this story for what seems like an eternity. What did you make of that confrontation? And are we still waiting for the Vatican to hand down a canonical sentence, perhaps of spiritual abuse in the Rupnik case?
Well, I'll ask the audience, does that look like an innocent man in front of you? No. This reminds me of other, perpetrators who are ambushed, so to speak, by the media. And then what do? They put their hand in front of the camera and then they try to run away. Now, we know that this so-called, or the investigation, the Vatican said that it's under investigation, but it's been going on a year and a half. I think they could have convicted him within 3 months based on the evidence that was already presented by previous investigations. Nonetheless, Cardinal Fernandez said that there's going to be a judicial process, meaning that he'll have a church trial.
Yeah.
Well, we've never heard about the trial. Cardinal Fernandez said that, I think in January, they're going to get a panel of judges and the like. But where is it? Why hasn't it been named? It's very sad to say that canon law is often done behind closed doors, and that's not how justice systems in the modern world work. This should have been known. There's also a rumor now out that the decision will be handed down shortly.
Yeah, OSV
which I hope is
reporting
true.
that.
Yeah, I hope exactly. OSV reports it now. This is the thing. Is it when has the trial been? Has the trial already happened? Did Rupnik testify? Who were the witnesses? None of that is known. There's something called an administrative process, which means that you don't really have to do all the same formalities. Was that invoked? That was used to remove Cardinal McElroy from the priesthood. So all I can say, Raymond, on this case is this man was excommunicated because he absolved an accomplice in a base sin, which undoubtedly that accomplice most likely was coerced. He was already excommunicated. We know this history. When you have a perpetrator who's then convicted, becomes a guilty party, and then other witnesses come forward, the credibility of those witnesses is almost universally confirmed because they're saying the same thing that's already been found to have happened. So it's taken much too long, and we do look ridiculous that this man has no precautions. In the United States, if a man had 40 accusations against him, he would not be allowed to conduct public ministry as a priest. Now, Rupnik, of course, wasn't wearing a collar, but he's still Father Rupnik, and he responded to that. So thank God that this process apparently is going to come to a conclusion. I hope it's a just conclusion.
Bob, how devastating is this video and the facts of this case? I mean, we have other priests who've been stripped of their faculties at lightning speed for daring to face East or hold a traditional mass. Where is the justice in this case? Yeah. And has there been a carve-out for Rupnik, as there were for other bishops who've offended in the past?
Yeah. No, I think it's even worse than that. I personally know of at least 2 priests, American priests. Yeah. I mean, people talk about the church still not having resolved the abuse problem, and of course, you could criticize parts of what it is. But I know of at least 2 priests who were just accused of something that actually seemed to me very light and were removed from the organizations in which they were working. And went years before there was any determination, but were removed, were not publicly functioning as priests, were not involved in any church activities, certainly were not allowed to be near people, whether adults or children, that they had been accused of doing something with before. And they were both exonerated. I mean, it took a long time for that to happen. But here we have a very prominent figure. As Father says, I mean, the evidence, we don't know what kind of trial is taking place, but the evidence quite clearly points to a conviction. And he goes on and on. We know that he was taken out to a kind of a monastery outside of Rome by Cardinal Donatius, which is given special favor on top of just this thing going on and on and on. So how devastating is it? Well, I have to think that for victims around the world, it's absolutely horrifying. But for the average Catholic, you look at this and you say, well, what kind of level playing field is this? Some people get, we talk about 2-tiered policing. Some people get special deals, and other people get removed on the slightest rumor or I know, but accusation.
But the question has to be raised, and I hate to be the one that has to raise it, but we have to, because it's honest and it's truthful. You had Zanchetta. You had all these bishops, cardinals, in some cases very close to the Pope, who were given their own lane of justice, Father. And they were free to operate. And really it took, in the case of one of these bishops, it took the Argentine authorities petitioning to drag him back there because he'd been found guilty in the civil courts before the church finally said, okay, you can have him. I mean, this is not just. It's not fair.
No, and it makes the church look ridiculous, which means you can laugh at what the church says, that it's upholding standards of justice. You're referring to Bishop Zanchetta, who was the spiritual directee of Pope Francis when he was bishop in Buenos Aires. And then he was the first bishop named in Argentina by Pope Francis after he became Pope. Bishop Zanchetta was convicted and jailed for sexual abuse against seminarians.
Right.
He was released from jail on a mercy petition because of his so-called illness. And then he was, now who knows where he is. The reports were that he was enrolled. But this is about 4 or 5 years ago. A canonical process was announced by the Vatican at the time. We've never heard anything, whether that process actually happened, whether it concluded, whether he found guilty or innocent. But why in the world was Zanchetta given favor? Meanwhile, Bishop Daniel Fernandez, who was a good bishop in Puerto Rico, who had disputes with the other bishops, he was removed from office unceremoniously. No decree given to him stated what happened, because there couldn't be a decree that would be just because he had done nothing wrong. He had a few disagreements with other bishops. Well, guess what? That's life. So no, when you say 2-tier justice system, you can say, look, Bishop Strickland was thrown out of his diocese because he didn't cooperate with some of the things he was supposed to cooperate with. But wait a minute. Zanchetta went to jail, and he still hasn't been removed from the priesthood for abusing a seminary. This is wrong.
Yeah, no, it's outrageous. It's outrageous, and it's a pity more Catholics don't know about it, but they don't because, as you said, we never get the results of these canonical trials. Gentlemen, before we run out of time, another big story. This week in Washington, we saw the official installation at the Mass of Cardinal Robert McElroy. Took place at the Basilica of the National Shrine of the Immaculate Conception. Various reports have said the installation took place before a full house. Then there were photos where they showed a less than full basilica. I wasn't there. I can't say one way or the other. But the incoming 8th Archbishop of Washington has said he has no plans to meet with President Donald Trump, but has recently spoken at length to former President Joe Biden about Pope Francis's health, etc. Quickly to both of you, Bob, then Father, your thoughts on the new Archbishop and what seemed to be a snub of the current occupant of the White House, and given the pastoral concerns the bishops have that touch on federal policy, wouldn't it be wise to at least say, okay, I'm going to make an effort to at least reach out to the administration?
Yeah, I think if you're Cardinal Archbishop of Washington, D.C., you have to be Cardinal Archbishop of both parties. I mean, it's painful in some respects in either party, but you have to be at least projecting that that's what you're going to be doing. My greater worry is about what he is as a theologian, if I can put it that way, because he's certainly come out very strongly in favor of LGBT people. He's talked about the church's teaching about homosexuality as a barrier. We shouldn't erect barriers to the Eucharist in the name of Eucharistic coherence, which was one of the things that the Pope said about Biden. He said that Biden needs to practice Eucharistic coherence. He's proposing a kind of a changing in our theology of the Eucharist by which if you commit a mortal sin, somehow that doesn't separate you from the body. That means in a way, it's almost a greater recommendation for you to receive the Eucharist. So I'm worried about that. I'm worried about the way that I think that he's probably believing that he can wade into political issues when I think it's much wiser for a Cardinal Archbishop of Washington to try to speak out when there are very, very clear moral questions at stake. But otherwise, practice a certain asceticism.
Yeah. Father, I'll give you a crack at that question about whether he should be reaching out.
In the Synodal Church, which Cardinal McElroy was at the Synod, he's a representative of that way of thinking. It's about dialogue. And now he's already announcing he doesn't want to talk to the President of the United States. That's contradictory. It's a big mistake. And Bob is right. You have to be bishop for all Catholic people, Democrat and Republican. And, you know, what his whole history, as Bob noted, his theological pronouncements and really innovations which contradict Catholic teaching. We've also got to look at the history of sexual abuse because he's under accusation by a victim of a satanic rape by a priest, now an ex-priest called Bertrand Jacob. Are you going to refer to this?
I'm going to play.
Right
I want to play a little clip of that. And you know, as we mentioned, this McElroy's installation was not without controversy. Just outside, there were Catholics protesting McElroy's installation because of alleged mishandling of sex abuse cases when he served as Bishop of San Diego. Abuse victim Rachel Mastrogiacomo accuses Cardinal McElroy of being complicit in covering up her rape. Watch.
I'm here to tell the truth. The truth is that I was exposed to a very dark predator who ritually abused me within the holy sacrifice of the Mass. This happened in the summer of 2010. He eventually was found guilty in criminal court of this crime, and Cardinal McElroy was complicit in covering up my ritual rape. He was criminally complicit.
Father, San Diegans have heard this allegation of cover-up for a long time, but it's probably new to a lot of Washingtonians and a national audience. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no. Remember, the mantra was, we have victims, we have to listen to them. So Rachel deserves to be heard. And what is her request? Her request is that Cardinal McElroy address the history of what he did when he became aware of this priest, Jacob Bertrand, his evil acts, and what he did in response to it. Because Rachel says that the diocese was not cooperative when he was the bishop.
Right.
This all happened before he became bishop, by the way, the crime. But afterwards, when he was called to account before the justice system, the claim by Rachel is that the system did not, the diocese did not cooperate. So let's get all the facts out here. We need to know because, of course, expectations for how a bishop's going to treat these matters in the future is largely based on how they've treated them in the past. And if he has a record of being accused of being lax or not cooperative, he should want to clear the deck on that.
Yeah, and he's also occupying a see that was McCarrick's cardinalatial see, and then Donald Wuerl's cardinalatial see, both of whom, you know, struggled with charges of not responding to sex. One was a predator, one who actually guilty of these crimes. The other with pushing them aside or not addressing them.
Yeah, he's been saying over the years, because he was alerted by Richard Sipe, a very famous person who was following these abuse charges. He was given material about McCarrick. Cardinal McElroy was given the information by Richard Sipe. Mm-hmm. Right. But if you look at the history of that, I mean, we all knew about Cardinal McCarrick back in the day. Everybody knew about this, and I'm sure Cardinal McElroy knew about it as well. But there seems to have been a will not to know. I mean, certainly a will not to investigate. He wanted SIPE to give him all these concrete testimonies, and of course, people back then didn't want to come out in public and talk about these things. But in any event, this is stuff that needs to be looked at very carefully, because, as you rightly say, Washington has had a history of McCarrick-like prelates passing through here. Cardinal Farrell, who occupies a very important post in Rome. In a certain way, Wilton Gregory as well is part of that current. And so this is not the best current that comes through Washington, D.C. by way of the church.
Yeah, there's a DNA we're seeing here that's troubling. Also, some of those Catholics who were gathered protesting, and again, it's hard because they were protesting multiple things at once, which is always a bad idea. Stick to one thing, you're usually successful in that way. But they were also calling for the Trump administration to initiate a RICO, a racketeering investigation, against the Bishops' Conference for its use of government funds to potentially aid in the cover-up of sex abuse cases. Father, your thoughts on this? I mean, I do worry about empowering the federal government. I mean, you know, we were talking about, they were very upset because in the last administration, you had the government casting an eye upon Catholics, and particularly those of a traditional bent. Now you've got an administration that they want to move in a different direction. Your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I'm not a big fan of RICO suits unless they're actually investing in the actual Cosa Nostra, the mafia, because they're generally used as fishing expeditions to try and entrap people for whom you have little sympathy. If people have charges of specific actions that they have knowledge of and evidence, bring that forward to prosecutors, because there are plenty of laws against fraud and abuse and the misuse of government grants. So, yeah, RICO suits, unfortunately, become an easy mechanism. But it's misguided, and I think a publicity stunt. Yeah. I'd much rather you say, look, prosecute ex-diocese, ex-bishop, because you have evidence that he used money that was meant for one purpose for another.
I'll give you the last word.
Yeah, and I would just say, look, it's not the church as a whole. Obviously, there have been good bishops on this, and bad bishops, and good priests and bad priests. So to take it up to that level, it's kind of drop a nuclear bomb on a problem that needs to be dealt, as Father rightly says, with discrete operations.
Well, and then it just becomes a bonanza for plaintiff attorneys that then, you know, want to sue everybody in creation, and to make them go away, they pay these settlements which end up shutting down your parishes. It's whether you're dealing with a guilty party or not, it's just to make it go away. That's never a good pattern. We will leave it there, gents, and of course we'll check in with the Papal Posse as we roll along. For commentary by Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray, you can visit thecatholicthing.org. Thank you both.